in my professional career. And
Yeah.
and those times are there's a lot of hype and a lot of non-substance, but in that chaos, there are certain groups that have substance, and those stick out. And so, even when I started New Tech, that was right at the beginning of the first one of the big tech bubble blowups, right? And the popping of that bu bubble in 1996, and it kind of felt like it kind of felt like the same thing. But then out of that, you had some fundamental companies that emerged and they stayed.
Yeah.
And I remember, computers in schools was hype, 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 and I still have the Atlantic article about the computer delusion that I'm cited in about new tech and putting a computer desktop for every high school kid in the building, right? How ridiculous that was.
And
And
I'm still
so,
Yeah, and I get confused by this because obviously a lot of people, I just mentioned Jeffrey talking about hype and so on, but I mean, I'm on that chat GPT and I'm probably a super user, as you might expect, working across two different instances, Canvas over there. Like I said, I've got you on the board now, so I've got that custom GPT over there.
yes.
And and it takes a little bit of crunching and clanking sometimes, but out of it, I'm getting some phenomenal things. And then I go and hear other people say, look, it's just rubbish. It doesn't do anything. I think are you really using this? Like, I get that it's difficult sometimes, but are you harnessing this beast?
Oh,
Or are
have
you,
you used the new
you know,
AI, the Chat GPT model, the preview?
yeah, well, that too, trying to get my head around that one and the canvas
Yeah,
at the same
no,
time and everything
it's
else.
quite remarkable. We put a whole business intelligence system that all the code was completely generated from it, and it freaking works. It would have taken me a team of four people, 4 months for building that
No.
thing. I built it in like 3 weeks, not even full time, and there were painful moments. It reminded me of the my years in Silicon Valley. I was in my 20s and had a tech company, and it gave me PTSD because I had to all-nighters yelling at my
Mm.
senior programmers, right? That were just on their own world and stubborn as hell, and they had good days and bad days. Well, there was a few all-nighters with this getting it to work and understand what you really wanted, and you misunderstood me, and oh, I'm sorry, and you have to go. The only difference is you get new code in 10 minutes, in 5 minutes, not 3 days.
Yeah.
Um, but the process felt almost exactly the same, and just on an accelerated basis, and the back and forth and the iterations, but it ultimately it's quite remarkable how far it got. It saved us a couple $100,000 easily.
Really?
Oh yeah. And
Damn.
we did a whole private equity fund structure set up, and we got it through three legal counsels on all sides of this, um, and I'm really good with pre-legal kind of paper. 300 pages of securities documents modeling the best things that you can and everything. And you just we ran a lot of stuff for editing and just for clarity and the intention of what we're trying to do, almost like a legal editor
Mhm.
with Chat GDP. And I got back one sentence I had to change in 300 pages from three attorney firms reviewing this thing. It saved us a $500,000 of legal fees.
Yeah.
This would not be possible 2 years ago. Like not even
No.
not like I would have spent at least, it with more work on my side, I would have to spend probably $250,000 minimum to get to what
Yeah.
like it was quite astounding.
I mean, Ted, I've been pushing back on this jobs narrative for a while. I was at LinkedIn and the CEO says, hey, AI will create jobs, guys. The internet created jobs, so AI will. And that was the sole encompassing of his thoughts
Oh,
on this
I
before
almost
he
had a
moved
heart
on, right?
attack because, they had the legal teams review, and then we had this 2-day period that we're going to have calls with each one of them to get their comments. I had no idea if it's going to get like this stuff is crap, throw it out, start from scratch, or here's 100 comments of things we want you to fix, right?
Yeah, 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 quite possible.
One sentence. It was to harmonize with the broker dealer on some language that they had, and they would feel more comfortable. It was the same thing. They had nothing else to say. Literally. I was just, yeah.
Yeah. Can I say, look, maybe I'm a simple guy here, but this is a productivity tool. This helps companies do more with less.
And it
Is it
helped me
clear what the
understand
less
things.
is?
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
people.
It helped me understand things and legal concepts that, you still have to look at as non-official legal advice, but at least it gives you the principles and the background and citations. Say this is why we're leading this direction. This is the controversy in this area, and you can get that by knowing how to ask the right questions, right? And
Mm.
what you're really after. And that was a big aha. And this new model, the level up it does on it, it's just insanity.
Yeah, I mean, I reckon some people dropped out of the race on 3.5. They went, "Hey, look, this is madness. This is crazy," and then it was. And
And
then I
then
think those of
4.0,
us
the,
that,
the oh 01,
yeah, 4.0 was cl very usable. Oh
yeah, oh
ones
01
now.
is the preview is insanity. I don't know how, because it takes its own input, re-looks at things, double checks everything, re-articulates, comes up with other angles, and comes back with you with something that's quite pristine. It's quite scary.
Ted, I think we might be going off topic today. What do you reckon? Is that a danger in the next
It's
hour?
it's completely up to you. I'll follow your lead. We're here for a dialogue, make things interesting.
Okay, we got to promise ourselves that we will talk about education a bit.
That's gonna be your problem.
It's a good problem to have. I want to say a few welcomes because we've just taken over the hour here. It's 5 p.m. UK time here, but we're fired up for this meeting and excited. Ted, what time is it for you?
It is 11 a.m. Dallas, Texas time.
Dallas, Texas. And are you a recent mover to Dallas, Texas with all the tech wave, or have you been there a long time?
So I have had business partners over the decade here in a number of different ventures, but we technically got here 4 year going on 4 years from ago, 2020. My wife's Canadian and she's in media entertainment, film, television, and uh, when US kind of shut down on that front, British Columbia was open. So she went up there and I said, this is a great time to relocate from West Hollywood, California to Dallas, Texas, where things are happening. So we have 150 to 175,000 people moving here every year. Texas is about ready to launch its Texas Stock Exchange in 2026 to compete
Right.
with NASDAQ in New York. It's quite remarkable. The level of transformation as a city in just a short period of time is I've never experienced this. I have to go back to Silicon Valley in the probably the 80s and 90s to or a
And
parallel.
Elon Musk, genius, lunatic, neither, both.
Every genius is a lunatic. I've come to find out, and yeah, he's in the south end of Texas, which literally takes about 10 hours to get to from here driving.
That's good. A buffer. Right, let's do a formal start and then we'll see where the conversation goes today. But just a huge welcome first to Ted Fujimoto, who's been just a gentleman and a beautiful person to speak to over the last few weeks as we've been building up this conversation. Ted, I must say you're so polite and thoughtful, first and foremost, a wonderful human being, and I'm so happy that we've brought you into this space. I'll explain a bit more about how we try to run these meetings. They are very regular for us. And a huge welcome. I see there's 32 of us, rising 33 joining so far. So what we'll do today is Ted and I will talk for about, let's say, 30, 40 minutes. And then in that meantime, we're expecting lots of great comments, questions to come through on the chat, which is why Jaisel's here. So Jaisel's going to give us some formal introductions and then be scanning that chat. We'll come to her. She can tell us what's going on there and what some of the great comments and ideas and thoughts are. And then we'll have about another 10 minutes, maybe 10, just to kind of maybe put some forward thinking plans in place about what the future does look like in at least the near term. And then we're going to keep the call open. If you want to stick around, Ted, then that's great for a few minutes. If you've got other things to do, of course, we understand. I'm sure your schedule's not sitting there empty waiting for people like me to fill it. And in terms of the style that we do things, you probably noticed, Ted, quite relaxed. We try not to encourage anybody here to come and think they're smart and should tell other people how to do things, but we do love curious people, and we love open minds and different perspectives. I'll say a huge welcome. And if you want to put your videos on, please do. It'd be lovely to see you along the top bar. We're streaming live to LinkedIn as well. So one thing I will say here is when you're hearing this chat that we're having with Ted, let me put this in the chat, and you think, hey, I think somebody XYZ ought to be hearing this. Why not just ping them the link? We got some space in the room. Why not just send that link out now to one, two people that you think ought to be hearing this conversation? I'm sure they'll be glad to join us. The room's open. They'll be able to jump in. And I'll do a little bit of shameless promotion as well. I am writing heavily on LinkedIn at the moment. So if you haven't seen my newsletters, do come along and join the party, 3 a week. Let's see how long I can keep that up. And hopefully they're fairly unique anyway in terms of the angles that I'm trying to find around what's going on. So let's kick off, and please do put in the chat where you're joining us from today. It's always wonderful. Ted mentioned that he's Dallas way. Jason and I sitting here in Milton Keynes. I would say sunny, but it's rainy today. So the sun's gone away. So do let us know where you're joining us from today. It'll give Ted a chance as well to see the kind of international reach that we have on these calls. We've mentioned Canada already. We've got 2 coming in there. So huge welcome to Jenna and Peter. And while that's just coming through, Cornwall, good, you must be on holiday, Jeffrey. And Jason, would you like to do some formal introductions? And welcome.
Absolutely. Hi, Richard. Hi, Ted. So good to see
Hello.
you here. And I
Thank you
would
for
be
having me.
doing some introductions for all of us to know the work that you have been doing. So, Ted Fujimoto, he's the president of Landmark Consulting Group. Ted is a visionary in educational innovation, having created scalable, personalized learning environments that foster trust and intrinsic motivation. His work has been instrumental in transforming educational systems globally, ensuring that AI enhances human potential while supporting systematic change. That's really great to hear, Ted. And Richard Foster-Fletcher, chair of MKI.org and a global authority on AI ethics. Richard helps organizations navigate the complexities of AI, ensuring that technology is implemented responsibly and sustainably. His work focuses on aligning AI with ethical practices, particularly in education.
I don't
Thank
know
you.
where that global authority came in. Someone else wrote that.
I'll vouch for
Hope
you.
I've never claimed that. Goodness me. So, John, it's great to see you from Chicago. Love what you do on LinkedIn. John says he cleanses his LinkedIn every so often. And John, I'm still on your network, aren't I? Lucky me.
You are. Absolutely. I've not bumped you off yet, which I doubt that I will.
Wonderful to see you, John, and spend some time with us. You know Ted? Have you seen Ted before?
No, I'm not.
Excellent. I think we're in for a treat today. Love to get your
Thanks,
thoughts
Josh.
later on, John, or throughout. Look, if you really want to add something, just give me a wave, right? We're in an open space here. Jason, thank you so much for those intros. Ted, let's dive in and let's get an understanding of what's going on. So personally, I think you've had a remarkable journey, and I promised that we would talk about education before we get sidetracked. A journey in rethinking and reshaping educational systems, work with New Tech Network, big picture learning. Let's start with a little bit about you. What's inspired you to want to challenge traditional models of education, Ted?
Let's start that I hated school growing up.
I'm shocked.
And I was able to experience everything from single room country schoolhouses in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to expat private having private teachers, to larger schools, to boarding schools, to correspondence schools. And at the end of the day, I'm a very, I think I'm wired to just be a curious person. At the end of the day, it felt like a total waste of time. And even looking in my career and looking back of saying what parts of education actually contributed to helping me do what I'm doing now, I can probably think of maybe 3 or 4 classes between college, high school, and elementary school that stick in my head. The rest of it felt like a complete waste of time. And I think, when I launched my company, I moved it from Silicon Valley to Napa Valley, where I was born. And Napa is beautiful wine country, but wine country means it's a farm town. And there were 6 biotech companies that all decided to move there because it's a fancy farm town, great lifestyle, everything, but there were no workers. So we went to the school district and we said, we need help because we've got to move. We can't grow here. There's not enough workforce. And at that point, the district was a little bit overcrowded. And so they said, why don't you design a school, start a school that will help you with workforce skills and have at it, make an alternative school. So you don't actually have that many requirements. We'll just let you do it. And that was the inception of what became Napa New Technology High School. And I hated lectures, so we banned lectures. We did everything through projects using the same protocols that my most successful teams at my company were using. And we had clients, AirTouch Communications became Vodafone, became Verizon. We had Remy Martin, we have LVMH. Those were some of my first clients. And we were doing large enterprise systems worldwide. These are in the 1990s. And so we had a particular way.
Ted's not 25, despite appearances, by the way, if anyone's just checking the maths.
So we had, but I was in college when all this started, right? And so we had developed some team protocols that we were able to get stuff done on time, on project. They had to rapidly learn new industries and their ways of doing business that we had no idea about. And we had to learn it quickly and deliver product and deliver solutions. And so we literally took those protocols and we said, that's the high school. It was chaos the first couple of years, but long story short, the things I learned is that within the first few weeks, we had to start kicking kids out of the building at 7:30, 8:30 at night and on weekends because they wouldn't leave. These were kids we started the school as 11th and 12th grade, end of the pipeline of K-12 education because we needed employees. But what kid switches in the middle of their high school experience from a pretty decent school district? Those were the ones that were struggling in school. And yet they were so engaged, we had to kick them out of the building. They wouldn't leave the building. It was a completely flip without teaching to the test, but having them do real world projects using these project management protocols and how we got things done. They outscored on the standardized tests by 10 to 15% in every subject area of every high school in the whole county. And this was within the first year. And I realized that, this is the power of intrinsic motivation, the power of giving kids the sacred space, to actually have their brains develop and develop curiosity and to pursue it with a passion. They do that, they'll start outperforming in almost every academic endeavor as well, even the traditional metrics. Well, fast forward, that group has over 240 schools. They're still around. The first school launched in 96. Now there's over 240 schools. I think they stopped counting at a school level because whole districts are adopting this approach. And so that body of work of project-based learning, the idea of intrinsic motivation, connecting to not just hypothetical, case studies, but you're actively trying to tackle problems that adults and companies are trying to tackle. That's real meaningful work. If someone else solved it, why bother solving it again? And I think that was the approach that was an eye-opener. And what has motivated me since then is that understanding that, and even over the years, seeing the struggles of school systems, even adopting and sustaining this kind of work, and how much, academic framing, kind of traditional framing, starts to encroach on the core ideas, and pretty soon it starts devolving again, where the motivation starts to flip to an extrinsic based, accountability based, versus the intrinsic and motivation based and execution based. That I think has been a motivation in not just working with school systems, but um, leadership teams in other sectors, because this is a common issue of how do you actually respond to the changing world and so many new problems, or our role as humans in solving those new problems, given the changing tools and the changing relationships and the changing politics and the changing, so many things are just moving. What's our role? What's my role in all of this? And to be able to use, our intellect and our motivation to kind of figure that out. That's where the magic is, because I could spend, proverbial 10,000 hours trying to master a new programming language, but as of, a year ago, as of this year, there's no point. ChatGPT does a better job at coding than most programmers. So where we are now, so I think the skills conversation needs to evolve on why are we here as humans? What's our real role in solving these problems? And what's the most important in producing that intrinsic motivation to do so.
So let me catch up there in terms of your story. So you were in Napa Valley. Well, let's go right back. So first of all, and I want to reconcile the statements that you've made. You didn't get on at school because I can obviously see why. That's why I was sarcastic when you said it, because obviously, you're an entrepreneurial, creative type, and schools are very good at the opposite, institutionalizing people. And actually, so are universities and corporations. Now we mention it. So clearly, it wasn't an area where you thrived. You then moved to Napa Valley. You didn't have enough talent coming through. So you did what I think most of us would naturally do, Ted. You started your own school. And I think, that's pretty normal in that situation. And then, so what I don't quite see so far is that you obviously identified that need for schools to really encourage that creativity, and I'll call it childlike curiosity. But you're also describing treating people like adults there as well, weren't you? And expectations and motivations of an adult. How do those two things connect?
I'll give you exactly what we did the first year. Every high school kid got a trust pass. It looks like a backstage concert pass, right? And with that trust card, they could go anywhere in the building. They could get food in the cafeteria, bring it back to the work area, go to the bathroom, come back without asking any permission, as long as they didn't violate the culture of trust, respect, and responsibility of the culture in the building. If they violated it, they would have to earn it back. And there was a committee of their peers that would have to just dictate, here's what you need to do to earn our trust back. Trust me.
Wow.
No, I don't think there's any kid in that system in history that has lost their trust card twice. Because and it's about, trust. Start with trust, build respect, and learn how to develop responsibility. And so that's how that culture and treating kids like adults with guardrails, right?
Sure,
and
sure.
Oftentimes, one of the things I coach the principal almost on a weekly basis, and they would bring that, we have this discipline issue with schools because, or with some kids. And, there's kind of two things that really stuck out to me, and it used to drive me crazy as a student, was, the student body ends up being punished for the sins of, the 5% or the 3%. And one is, that was, in my mind, absolutely no. Deal with the 3%, figure out what they need, right? Secondly, is adults try to solve the problems and pose their solutions to solve those problems. And one of the philosophies was, no, give it to the kids, because they know better how to actually solve it, and be part of, have the adults be part of the solution creating, but really have the kids own the problem.
And so you were reimagining, reinventing. What mistake or mistakes did you make where you broke something and then realized afterwards that it was kind of there for a reason in schooling?
This is a big list. I guess, I guess the thing that was a big realization, we started to implement this model in different communities. rural communities, and then big urban districts. And the thing that was a big aha for me is that systems, to be able to just to change a system, sometimes it requires an extraordinary amount of political fire cover. Doesn't matter. It's not about right or wrong.
I see.
It's about when you're asking, let's say a district is doing a particular, it has a different way, a certain way of doing things, and it has even a really great professional development and curriculum division in that district, big district, right? Well, when you start to go to project-based learning, for example, you don't need that. The scope changes, right?
Mm.
And so even when people get excited about it, but at the end of the day, it would mean cutting your own team in half. It's, it's self, it's not good. It's a self-preservation at that point. And so good intentions only go so far without the political fire cover and without creating the doors to enable people to evolve, to do other things that they can be motivated about. Because otherwise, they'll just block you out of pure survival. I have 2 kids in college, so I can't lose my job, and I just know it's coming. We're going to have to figure out which 50% are going to go away, and I don't even know what I'm doing next, right? That's the institutional barriers and the violations, if you will, that is very underestimated in innovation, in entrepreneurism, and even the notion of disrupting, industries. I don't like the word disruption because I think it's important to evolve, and that allows people to find their place. Disruption sometimes is just that. When you cut off electricity to a city, that is disruption. And sometimes certain innovations can have that similar impact.
So was your vision diluted then as you scaled? And how did you feel about that?
I think, what happened is that and this is what we evolved to, what we call our school design studio process. Let me digress a bit. One of my decade-long clients was the consulting company that came up with the whole Saturn Car Company retailing concept that revolutionized how car dealerships operated. And they were able to launch a brand new brand under General Motors with that. And they end up re-engineering 11 automotive and hospitality brands, including Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Toyota, Honda, and this was in a very critical period of time where that sector had to evolve, and they worked also with Ritz-Carlton and Four Seasons. And what I learned through that process, and this is about how do you get a bunch of redneck, bullheaded, stubborn, multi-generation auto dealers to do something completely different, their dollar, their employees, their buildings, and their capital, and how do you sustain and replicate that and scale that to 1,100 dealerships worldwide, right? Or Ritz-Carlton, how do you double the number of locations and you're the first 5-star hotel sitting on an island in the middle of the Pacific, and most of your employees are living in huts, and they don't even, they've never experienced a 5-star resort in their life, but yet on day one, you have to deliver a 5-star experience. How do you do that? And this firm specialized in that. And I bring that up because that was the methodology that we used to help scale New Tech and Big Picture and many others. It was an idea of, one is culture is intentional. It's a mindset that you have to calibrate to. But then there are certain design elements of your organization, of your school, of whatever an organization is doing that is timeless, universal, and non-negotiable. And these aren't goals. Like, oh, I want to have, I want to have happy kids. Well, you can't control. What are you doing to create the environment to create happy kids? That's simply a outcome. And at best, it's a hypothesis of an outcome based on your actions, on your executions. And good organizations execute well. Poor organizations they all have the same goals. No one wakes up in the middle of the night saying, "Oh, I want to go to work tomorrow and I want to be the worst company in the world." They don't do that. All right. Schools don't do that. Every mission statement for every school I've seen looks exactly the same. They don't say, "I'm going to hurt kids." Right.
I think even
So the
Enron's mission
goals are all the
statement was pretty
same.
good, to be honest.
But the execution, how, that reliability of that execution and the hypothesis that if we do these things, we will probably get to these goals. That's a different process. So the design elements aren't goals. The design elements are what are the executions that we feel are so timeless, even with different changes in technology and society, that defines our promise to our kids, to our community, it's a brand promise. If you walked into a Ritz-Carlton, they gave you a completely different experience than what their brand represents on a negative side, that would be very disheartening, right? So that promise is so important. And so we built new tech around those promises. And I guess the thing, to answer your question now, was that diluted? No, I think what ended up happening is that we became much clearer. Instead of having 100 things or 25 things, it became like a dozen things or half dozen things are pillars of these brand promises and these timeless, non-negotiable design elements on execution that we knew everything else could vary, but you could recognize that this relates to the brand. And I think that was a big aha. The second thing that was aha, and my whole background, project-based learning, everything. So I'm very biased toward, this type of learning because I think it's most effective in rewiring the brain in solving problems and in how most practical what humanity needs going forward. However, I would say that a well-executed classical education compared to a poorly executed PBL, execution is what drives it more than, so I would say execution trumps pedagogy in that case, because you're delivering your promise. Even if I don't fully agree with it, overall, I see a better net effect when you have a culture that knows how to execute well.
Interesting. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit then, because before we started officially, you were talking about 01, weren't you, from ChatGPT and how it might have saved you $250,000 in coding, and you produced legal documents where a team of lawyers could only find one thing that wasn't correct about it. I don't know if that was the previous version of ChatGPT, but the logic stands. So what does this look like then? Let's direct our lens at the future of education. If these tools can do that, what can they do in the classroom, Ted?
So it really begs the question for me, and as the capabilities of the technology are evolving probably faster than I anticipated. And I feel previously that I've been pretty good at predicting kind of trajectories. This one is superseding that. And, in the past, it took a lot to get access to knowledge, and knowledge being which books to read or which people to talk to. Even a decade ago, it took a lot. And one of the things that kids have a hard time is they don't have access to the social networks. They don't have a family friend, that is an expert in such and such that they could just, talk to and have coffee with. Right? What has changed is that some of the best information and knowledge is available at your fingertips, and it's more accessible, and that information and knowledge is articulated probably better than most people and experts can actually articulate themselves in the time frame you have with them. AI beats them, and it's getting better with every generation. Every 6 months, it's exponentially getting better. So it really begs the question, well, if the knowledge is at everyone's fingertip, and I guess the realization, the aha for me was, if a first grader who was curious enough about pick a topic in the world knew the right question to ask, they would have not only the equal level of access and answer than an adult PhD would. But even if they didn't understand what they got back, they could dialogue with chat, with AI and probably get an explanation that would move them leaps ahead. Then think about the process that would have to occur about 20 years ago. So if that is available, I think it's more the value of knowing what questions to ask, the ability to try to understand what's happening around you, of not only how the world works, but what are some of the things that need to be solved. That inquiry is probably the most important thing. And you can't
Just to
use,
jump into, are you
yeah.
suggesting that that level of inquiry would be increased by the access to be able to fulfill that inquiry in the first place? Like a
So
self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah, and it really begs, when we started New Tech, the teachers were deliberately called facilitators.
Mm.
And they weren't supposed to be the subject matter experts. Their goal was to facilitate bringing experts' knowledge, relationships to the table to help the kids accelerate solving completing the project that they were after completing.
Mm.
I've taken, over the years, I've evolved that even further. I call them concierge. I would view it more like as concierge of mind-blowing calibration experiences. When you go to a new country or you have a conversation with somebody and it just blows your mind. And even if you hate the conclusion, you can't unthink it. You can't unsee it. You saw what you saw. And that's because it's not just an intention. It's your brain physically rewired itself to create new neural pathways to process information about that topic or that experience in a particular way. And that's a very powerful thing. It works. Think about PTSD, a bad experience. Just one smell or sound can trigger someone. They know it's triggering them, but it's so powerful. That experience might have been only, a couple seconds, right? And people get PTSD from that. That's because the brain has created neural pathways to trigger in a particular way. Think about using the same thing for positive experiences. And we can all reflect on pivotal points and experiences, could be even little things in our lives that were profoundly impactful in a positive way to help us look at the world differently. And so when you look at learning as not just an intention, you need to be open-minded as an intention to allow I want my brain to create new neural pathways so I can understand things better, but it's a physiological process to make that happen. Then I think you look at things a little differently about an effective way to speed that up.
Are you not describing little Richards here or little Teds? And I have to say, you strike me as somebody who would grab this app early on in life and be really happy that they can supplement the insights of their parents, friends, grandparents were mentioned in the chat. But of course, we've had access to the knowledge for a long time. We've had Google. Of course, we've had a lot of free courses on Udemy and God knows, all the stuff you can get from YouTube. So what are you describing that's different about having access to a generative AI large language model like this? And who are you picturing just the motivated people in the first place, or are you suggesting this creates a level of more general motivation across the populace?
I think there is a need for the general motivation of the populace. Because right now we have been baked into corporate and education systems around certain structures and formalities, which creates some order. But they're starting to prove, you've seen some tension with that, where it's insufficient to address some of the problems that we need to address. Now, the problem is there's so much knowledge and there's so much information out there. That's why a concierge role to say, I've been looking at this. I want to share with you some of the more important things that have been very helpful to this particular topic or the project or the problem you're trying to solve. And so you do need people to guide. Now, guides and concierge, you need to trust. So one of the things that that I think this goes to the topic of this conversation around the humanity of what needs to be embedded in conjunction with AI and all these tools and the evolution that's happening here, is that we had a couple of mantras with UTech. It is trust, respect, and responsibility. And information without trust, information without respect, information without and knowledge without responsibility in the wrong hands. That's a good lens to filter and make sure that you can trust. If you have a group of people that you trust and you know they have trustworthy sources, and you can move with that information much faster than some randomized thing, which is a Google problem, right? The other thing, which is equally important, and this distinguishes the highest performing organizations that sustain over time. And when I say sustain over time, this is over multiple generations of leadership, as an example, is that those organizations start with relationships first. And then with those relationships, they understand the relevance to the people that they're interacting with. And then they as all strive for world-class work. It's relationships, relevance, and you could call it rigor, but I don't like the word rigor. I like the more world-class work. Organizations and school systems tend to be completely structured to be rigor first. We want high standards and academic results. And if you're having a hard time, well, I'm going to try to connect it to your real life or something that's important to you, make it relevant to you, right? It's something done to you, not intrinsic, extrinsic. And the only kids that have a relationship with adult are the ones in the principal's office. So the relationships it's negative based. So this is a polarity of a culture. It's either, relationships, relevance, world-class execution, or it is rigor, relevance, and then relationships. And that's why if you go to in hospitality establishment, you walk in, a guest can tell pretty quickly which polarity runs through it. So in that, if you look at the relationships, relevance, and world-class execution lens, and then you layer in technology, the key is what people you're working with. And how they're going, and they want to bring information and knowledge that's relevant to you, to your team, to them, that's actually valuable. And then you have the dimension of trust and respect and responsibility. Then you can navigate through all kinds of chaos with those two constructs working together. Without any of those frameworks, then it becomes very randomized and polarized.
But what stops AI just amplifying some of the bad stuff that you're describing? Because we know that's what it does. It scales whatever's happening, good or bad. We carry a risk there, don't we? We do. But the alternative is it happens anyway. Yeah, I sense that about you, is that you're such a, well, you are, the human touch part is absolutely something that comes through straight away. And when I contacted you right from the beginning, I want to make that very clear. You are a humanist, no doubt about it, and you respect and love the teachers that are around the world. I think we all do follow your lead on that. But you're clearly, you're suggesting, I believe, that there's not that much to lose, that actually things are so fragmented and broken at the moment that the risk isn't that high. So think about this. People, in political polarization, for example, people are trusting the wrong people. True, right? And yes. They don't have, so their relationships are that it might be relevant to them because they're angry about something, or positive or negative, right? And then they try to be rigorous about whatever they're doing. But then when you don't have the other lens of trust, respect, and responsibility to balance that out, you need those pieces to have empathy, to understand the bigger picture, to understand, yes, people, at the end,
let me give you an example. This occurred to me this morning as preparing for this conversation. I wonder, let's say I'm in Texas, and let's say that I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I happen to find out my lot, I had access to oil.
Better chance than me.
And I knew, I was guaranteed that I had generational wealth, that finances was completely off the table. Okay. I could travel, I could do anything I wanted, so that financial stress and I could feed myself, I could take care, I could have experiences. So Maslow's hierarchy needs are completely handled, right? The question is, would I, for what other motivations would I need to do something bigger or something different? Would I subject myself to working for a bureaucratic system? Probably not. Why? Right? How many people are in their positions and they figured out how to be motivated and even intrinsically motivated by being in the system and finding meaning to their work. But if they were given this opportunity and they weren't stuck sitting on that property, they could fly the world, money was no object, would they make different choices? And this is kind of a rich example, but I think everyone has these trade-offs on what they're willing to sacrifice when they're trying to meet their Maslow's hierarchies of needs. And when you start removing those constraints, what's a true human potential there, right? And this doesn't get solved overnight. There's lots of ladders and tunnels that have to be navigated throughout life to figure this out. But I think one of the most important roles of education, this is what we found early on with the high school kids we worked with, from everything from rural to hardcore urban, is the one thing that they lacked that could speed up this access was, number one, is connect them, give them relationship capital to some of the best people in the world as quickly as possible. Because that's the one thing that a trust fund kid has access to, even though they don't even want to use it. It's just there, and they happen, it's accessible to them. That's one of the biggest gaps. The second part of it is to expose them to all of the millions of problems that we have and opportunities we have in this world that they don't see because they haven't been exposed. And who are the best people to bring that relevancy to them? Is going to be the people that are literally spending their life work and resources trying to solve these problems. And that's how you get inspiration. That's how you say, I want to work with you to solve that problem. And then they're already working with some of the people that are doing the best work in this area. So that then navigates naturally to start to set the bar at world-class work.
Okay. Let's pause for breath, Ted, because I promised that we'd go around the room. Obviously, I could speak to you for about 2 days without a pause. That's clear. There's so much to get into here. Jaisal, I see the chat started to light up a little bit now, so perhaps you could give us an update.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have some questions on the chat. And one of the questions that Peter Scott has asked is, how and when should we prepare students to fill critical high-stress jobs, which do not give them the choice of what they have to deal with, like emergency room doctors, armed forces, police, where being overwhelmed is inevitable?
A really tough question because society is structured in different society, different countries are structured the way they are. And so I think this is something that is more of a transformational process that happens within certain industries, certain regions that create that alignment, say, this is important to us. And even in those roles, their roles might be changing, especially with physicians. AI in many cases is better at diagnosing certain things than physicians are. So then what's the role of the physician? And I would say to start, it's about the relationship with the parent, the patient and their family, communicating the relevance of what's happening and the information you're about ready to share and the knowledge is really important, and how to work together to create a world-class outcome, right? With all the technology and knowledge and the information base in the background, right? It goes back to that same construct. And what's really unfortunate to me is that in so many careers, because people haven't been trained to communicate and create those relationships and create that relevancy and create that engagement in others, AI might be out communicating a big chunk of the population in their work areas. So when it comes to, let's say, teachers, I know most of the teachers I experienced through my education career, I would be communicated better with and more accurately and in a way that I could learn faster by just asking ChatGPT today. That's a fact. But then I can remember a few teachers that there was true wisdom there. There was true connection there. There's true connection to what I was trying to do with my career, launching a company and trying to go to school at the same time, that gave me motivation and insight and just good, solid advice on how to navigate complex problems that ChatGPT, even today, couldn't create the same effect and impact on rewiring my brain, my calibration, if you will, on looking at the world in a particular way.
I think it's more about the human connection, as you really mentioned. No matter how much the tools expand and extend with knowledge, with the data sets, but the human connection is going to make a difference, I think.
So think about police officers and all the controversies of, the de-escalation or escalation and interaction. If it's communication is a big issue. And so I think it boils down to that. And when you have, jurisdictions, for example, they have police forces that are organized to build relationships with the neighborhood and not just drive through like so many cities. That they actually they walk block by block, household by household, business by business. They know all the characters, good characters, bad characters in that community. It builds empathy, it builds perspective, it builds relationships, and it changes the dynamics.
I think we have another question which is quite interesting to me, because the way the youth thinks today and the mindset is, I think Nicola has asked a very important question. Can AI teach trust, respect, and responsibility in real time in context?
State that question again.
Can AI teach trust, respect, and responsibility in real time in context?
Well, that's a really good experiment. I have seen I've seen a AI experiment of basically there's some big large swaths of the population that do not have access to good psychologists for mental health. And there was an experiment at Cedars, I think it was one of the US institutions that basically had where you could give advice to yourself. So you would literally be in VR, say, here's my problem, and then it would transpose you. So it's you pick your avatar on your side and you give advice to yourself, and AI informed. And I was shocked about some of that data, where basically that process outperformed the median of the quality of psychologists in the area. And I don't know if that's a judgment on the bar of the psychologist qualities, right? Or it's that AI is that good. in that process is that good. But I mentioned that in that I think there's potential there, but there's no substitution for a deep human connection that understands you as a person to person, understands you well, understands your motivations. I think AI can suss out moods and look at your email and say, I think there's something going on with you, but it's not going to build empathy the way a human can. Now, if you have, and I'm saying this kind of tongue in cheek, lazy humans who don't want to, they don't bother to know that you're having a good or bad day, and they're just going through the motions. AI might actually outperform you in creating that, moment of empathy. It's, and asking you, how are you doing, right? But this is why I think the skill of building deep, meaningful relationships, creating relevancy, creating that intrinsic motivation to do world-class work, and then you could open up saying, use whatever tools you need to do that world-class work. It's properly rooted in the humanistic things like empathy, like we're really trying to make things better for everyone. We're not trying to squash anybody, right? And so these are tricky times. And we're not going to evolve as a society all together, all exactly at the same time. This is going to be a messy process. And certain organizations, certain teams, certain countries, certain regions are going to get better at this faster than others because of the intentionality of embarking on this journey.
Thank you, Ted. I have a few more questions, but I'll go for two, I think, looking at the time. What makes an AI system ethically superior to a human, based on the fact that the input is from human actions, and we are not exactly sure how and why we get the given output?
So if you're late to the session, this is Ask Ted the most difficult questions in the
world. So we're talking about AI last month or next month?
And after that, Ted, if you can just tell me 1,000 years from now, give me an idea of what the world will look like. Okay, just off the top of your head, right?
I've always had a belief that we're going to have to figure out. AI is going to develop its own biases. Without, just like humans, right? If they're exposed in a particular way and they have a certain environment, data, information, and relationships exposed to, and that's the only people that they're talking to, it's going to bias the system, right? And so I don't think there's no perfection here, but I think there has to be some safeguards. And the safeguards, it's really tricky because on one hand, you have so I think we can learn, and companies can learn who are building these systems by understanding certain safeguards that are important to certain types of work in certain industries. I think that is you can get to better definitions around that. For example, if I have AI helping me with legal determinations on something, where the boundary there is the AI is not going to give you answers to intentionally violate the current laws and regulations, right? There are some, or in medical, you're not going to do the patient harm, right? There are certain safeguards. So I think every industry sector has to figure that out, kind of like ISO and electrical wiring and building code and things like that. But it's going to be a long, involved process. What I am concerned about is when you have AI companies that don't have a governance that can transcend ownership and shareholder changes and board changes, that can adhere to whatever policies and charters that they have to say, here's our guidelines to our safety barriers. And I think there's some attempt of getting more transparent and about it, but we don't fully know. And I think that's the danger. And certain countries and regimes are going to care less about those safeguards than others, which then also, gets us into a different kind of arms race. And I don't know the answer. I don't think anyone knows the answer to how to do that well. I think it's the obligation of every industry sector to create some level of standards and at least start having those conversations to require certain safeguards to be part of that sector.
You would consider yourself an optimist, I think, Ted.
Mostly, I would say I launched insurance captives, property casualty, workers' comp, and I figured very quickly risks aren't bad as long as you can right price them. And if you can't right price them, it's not worth taking. So entrepreneurs sometimes will go after risks because of the opportunity, but they don't right price the risk, and that's when you have problems. So it's about right pricing risks. And sometimes you walk into a situation or environment where you can't right price anything. And at that point, you have to figure out how to just buy time. That's a legitimate strategy. In other cases, you'll say there's certain things that we can right price. And then you build your strategies around how do you navigate around the things you can control, despite all the things that might go sideways. And if you can find a through line, then that's a reasonable strategy. So in times of evolution and tremendous evolution and chaos, I think that's a very useful tool. When things, work the way they're supposed to, and they all, for a pretty long period of time, Silicon Valley, they said, in a hurricane, even frozen turkeys can fly, and they're all so proud that they're flying. But as soon as the wind currents drop, then all the frozen turkeys fall out of the sky, and no good bird or flying machine that's really capable of flying would ever go up in a hurricane unless it's designed for it. And so now, with normal conditions or less extreme conditions, then you can get the more nuanced organizations and teams working and doing good work versus everyone thinking they're doing good work, but it's really just the underpinnings of what's happening in the environment that you can, it's like, it reminds me of like real estate agents, in a booming real estate market and everyone's making money. And then when the economy fails, there's only a few left. And the ones who have the good relationships, the ones who know what real estate is relevant to their client base, and knowing how to get them right fit to the right things, and everyone else just kind of falls out.
Well, you've nailed my crypto strategy anyway, which has not been successful so far. I said to my friend today, I'll be handing over my coins to my grandchildren on my deathbed, just saying, just hold them a bit longer. They're coming back, I promise. Cardano's coming back. So, Ted, what do you want us to reflect on? We're still a decent sized group in here. People are finishing their day in the UK. What are the one or two questions that you'd like us to be running through our mind from this conversation?
In the role of education and all the attempts to try to make the technology safe and adoption. This goes back to the Atlantic it had an article in 1990s about the computer delusion, and I was cited in there about why the heck would you put computers and on every high school kid's desk, right? And I still have that article, and we go through these things, right? The question I ask is, if you can create the environment, what can you do more of, less of, or differently to create an environment where there are real problems and real tangible things, meaningful things that your teams and your kids can actually work on, and use the frame, what can you do to create the chemistry of relationships first, relevance, and then world-class work? What can you do to create the environment where you have empathy? You're able to because when you have those pieces in place, then you'll have more responsible use of technology. Technology is just a tool. I can use a hammer to break a window. I can, or to nail a nail, right? Or nail a nail in my finger. It's a tool. So it's about what you're trying to do and who's dictating that, right? And there's nothing more powerful than a group of kids, even a group of first graders that are so intent on solving a problem that's so dear to them, and letting them loose on every tool that they have access to try to do that. The policy is don't use your cell phone for this. Don't use, AI for that. No, use every tool you possibly can to get to the solution, because knowledge, even of the knowledge of the experts, is available at your fingertips today. Don't block that from the kids. And I, and I'm hyper aware of, right now everyone's, institutions aren't ready for this. And so they're putting, cell phone bans, they're putting all kinds of constraints, even even bank institutions are putting constraints and use. They don't want their information leaked out, and for good reasons, right? But we can't stop there. At some point we are going to have to use this in the right way, and make progress. So I think that is the strategic work that every school institution, every organization, for-profit, nonprofit, has to embark on as one of the pillars of their strategic plan, is how to leverage this vast knowledge, how to make sure that the cultures are prepared for this, because strategic planning is not a destination, it's a way of thinking. And that takes a different way. It's a different way of going about it, because that's how you're going to be able to navigate changing environments that you don't control, and we can't fully anticipate.
Yeah. And I've agreed with a lot of what you've said, but I particularly resonate with that last comment. And we see a lot of talk about upskilling, and I think that is falling short if that's the mindset here, because the way to come at this in terms of solving problems with AI, being coached by AI, having that curiosity and creativity, like I talked about the virtual board that we just set up. I'm on Google. I don't see anything about virtual boards in ChatGPT. I'm sure people are doing it. There's nothing on Google. It's just something I was sitting there thinking, wonder if you can do this. And hey, it turns out to be phenomenal. So I'm conscious that we can get some people using some great tools, but I think it's a bigger shift, as I think you're describing, Ted.
And it can feel overwhelming,
For
right?
sure.
So I
Yeah.
think, and even with people working, or students in large institutions, right? Things don't shift overnight necessarily within those organizations. But what can happen is to create a microcosm where the change is happening with the relationships you have within your teams, within your, within your pod, within your department, within your division. Because again, substantial change in the right direction does not happen without deep relationships. Remember, relationships first. So you got to start where those relationships are, and what relationships, I guess I wonder, something to think about is, what relationships do you need to have that in this context to develop and to nurture that maybe has been neglected or been off your radar. And because that's the pod that you'll run with. At some point you have to pick a pod to run with as you're navigating through some crazy times.
Yeah. Ted, obviously we could keep going. I don't want to keep you from your busy schedule, but I do want to thank you. You've spent a glorious hour and a bit with us. And I always admire the enthusiasm that can come from your part of the world, and there's been no lacking in that today in terms of positivity and a sense of what we can achieve and what we can do, and not being scared to break a few things along the way. And I'm very grateful for that. We're building a report. You're in good company, I think. We had Professor Jonathan Michie last week from Oxford. We've got Andrea Schroeder from OECD. We've got Vivian Wong, who's a famed neuroscientist in this particular section. So I'm really, really happy that you could contribute this. I'd love to stay in touch as well, Ted, if that's something that's possible.
And I have a few minutes if anyone wants to follow up on anything.
If you've got time to stick around, Ted, that'd be wonderful. But I'll put us back onto the shared screen here, and do put cameras on. Yeah, absolutely. But thanks again, Ted. Just before we jump into some Q&A, just want to say huge thanks for spending
My
some time with
pleasure.
us.
Thank you for having me, truly.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Guys, what do I want to say to Ted? What's on our minds? Yeah, Manajay, why don't you jump in?
Hi, good morning from Los Angeles. Yeah, first of all, is your name Edward on LinkedIn? Your
Yes, it
first.
is.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure I'm. Second of all, I love this idea of trust, respect, and responsibility, which is very what really caught my eye for the children and the example you gave about the card and the food and all that. And I mean, my own thing is about teaching people wisdom, compassion, and conscious leadership, conscious living. And if we can use AI to extrapolate, to scale such lessons and such teachings and such qualities, to pick up these qualities, learn them, I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, the realization that I've had is it's more, I think technology and AI has the ability so that we don't have to spend as much of our own energy and time to dig through knowledge that is now at our fingertips. We don't have to spend, months traveling around the world, meeting with people and getting hour here, hour there, where the information is at our fingertips. And so what is important, I think, is to allocate that energy and time to spend more time with people building relationships, understanding their relevance, understanding the world better, freeing us up to do the human things that we're wired to do. Because and that effort in itself helps shift an organization and a team's focus, right? It helps them understand a dimension that oftentimes we're just so buried in trying to grab for knowledge that we don't have the ability to get to know people in the process. I felt that throughout my career, like especially in technology. It was a pretty PTSD driven, brutal process, and just, 100-hour weeks, and, pounding out code and yelling at your programmers, right? It's just, and but if you don't have the empathy with the customer, you don't have that time where your programmers can sit with your customer for hours at a time because the code's being written in the background for them. It changes the dynamic quite a bit. It also changes what skills you value, as a person. And
so as a human side of human development part, the inner skills, inner qualities that are very valuable, very important for us to have, you would then say that maybe a partnership between AI and another human who has a little bit of evolution with, a little bit of evolved themselves, and using AI in partnership to create these qualities or help people develop these qualities.
Yes. I think there's potential for that. And there's already some studies around physicians where AI, in conjunction with, I think the last study I saw, this was a few years ago, AI in working with some of the top 30% of physicians in a particular area and certain diagnosis, that in combination had a much magnitude higher accuracy and ability to communicate and work with their patient than, let's say, the median physician using AI, right, or AI by itself. So the skills, the overall skill set of the human using the AI as a tools is an amplification rather than you just have mediocre humans trying to do more things, right? I think that's my takeaway from it anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Nicola.
Hello, Ted. Thank you very much. Now, obviously, there are two questions. You can choose one or the other, or delightfully, you could answer both. I'm interested in gaming, and I'm interested in the role of gaming in learning. And I was curious to hear from you whether, in fact, for example, I was talking to an expert in gaming about non-player characters or avatars that are not human, but provide a learning environment within a game. So I was wondering whether, in fact, that actually is a good space to provide learning to a wider community of young people who perhaps wouldn't have the natural way of inquiry. So that's my first question. My second one is, I'm curious about whether, in fact, we do need to collect data from the global south, whether in fact you feel there is a diversity in that. I'm experimenting with collecting more data from the global south, and I'm really interested in developing that area because I do think there's a difference. But do you agree with me? Do you think actually the data that we already have actually does cover humanity in terms of its diversity?
That's a really good question. Let me address that game one first. Been around a number of leaders in that space and seen a number of studies in that space. And I think it can be highly effective at building social emotional skills to create cooperation and teamwork and all, but it all depends on the game design, right? So it's a tool, but as a medium, you can get there, and a cooperative gaming, and it is a virtual space. I think there's potential there, and there's high level of engagement there, and especially among certain generations, it can be incredibly helpful. It can also create a synthetic environment where people can experiment with and testing things that they're kind of afraid to do in real life. And so there's a potential there. But again, it's you have to design a game in context of relationships, relevance, and world-class excellence, and trust, respect, and responsibility. And when you're able to incorporate those, like with some of the most successful games that I know some game designers were involved with, like with Sims and a few others that are, there's environments that can be heads and shoulders above others. On your second question, I think there's natural biases in the people that are driving institutions in AI and the training of AI just from their geographies and their backgrounds, that is naturally biasing in ways that we don't fully understand. And I think we're going to have to work harder at that. And I think it needs to be more industry based. And I'll give you an example. And for quite a few years, I'm on the board of California Credit Union, and we incorporate AI to detect the tonality of people's voices on whether it was a positive interaction or a negative one, right? And if it's a negative one, then manager can kind of look through and figure out if there's some intervention that needs to happen. Well, if it's it's all trained using California Credit Union customers in Southern California, and then all of a sudden let's say you happen to get a whole set of customers in Boston, Massachusetts, it might misclassify that, and that's just a rudimentary, example, but biases can creep in so many different ways. And I don't think we fully know the level, even if we have a committee or someone to try, our design group that try to make sure that our data that we're feeding is unbiased. Even it's tricky. I think it's going to be just a messy learning process. I wouldn't want to impose too much too early on trying to eliminate all bias, because I think then we'll get afraid of everything. But I think we need to be very conscious of it. It needs to be a very strategic level question we keep asking ourselves. Every organization needs to keep asking themselves to say, it's not healthy, it's not good even commercially for us to have these biases built in that are inadvertent. So it's something that, are we doing, what can we do more of, less of, differently, or stop doing to try to move in the right direction? So I think the directionality at this moment is probably more important than anything else. There might be an argument for certain sectors that it's completely not good if the biases are there. So those sectors can kind of, I think, they might have to be on a more aggressive time frame.
Thank you.
Peter, anything you'd like to add?
You're asking me? I didn't put a hand up, but it was referring to something that I had put in the chat.
No, just going around the room, Peter. That's all. I can head somewhere else if you.
Well,
If
thank
you'd
you.
like to
No,
make a
no,
comment.
not at all. Well, doing lots with education in this space at the moment, and in particular focusing on what the the role is of the teacher in the classroom. And so I'm interested in Ted's thoughts on those modalities that humans can exploit that AI cannot, because it's on the other side of a screen right now, and what we can do with engaging kinesthetic and even olfactory and gustatory senses in the class.
This is no, I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, it's during the pandemic, I've formed numerous teams, and even new companies got formed all through Zoom. And it took us 4 years to get to the same place together, but we're so used to working, on Zoom. It was great, and it accelerated and amplified what we wanted to do together. But the trade-off was we could have more frequent interactions and build deeper relationships because of frequency, versus, oh, I have to get on the plane, I'll see you next month in New York for 2 hours type of deal, right? Because it took the formality out of a lot of things, which with certain teams, it just worked better, right? But the counter to that is that there's nothing, especially when solving tough problems, there's nothing better than walking and talking, having a drink, having a meal with somebody, doing a physical, and just spending a day, and just, it's a physicality of meeting of the minds that it requires sometimes a mutual experience in the physical space to do that. And what I hope is that if, because knowledge is so accessible and the technical is so accessible, and I don't have to spend as many hours sitting in front of a computer doing reviewing legal documents, because it's, it speeds that up. It frees up days and days of my time to have more flexibility to spend time with people. I think that, and then the potency is what do you do with that? And I do not like sit down meetings. And if I want a team to think strategically, let's do a walk and talk. Let's, hang out somewhere where we're doing something physical, and it's a physiological thing that gets a brain moving and firing up new neural pathways that it would not have just in a sedentary environment. So that physicality is important. So again, that the trade-off is to use technology, use the virtual to create that frequency and connectivity, but amplify it by the other modalities, and I think that's so critical. My wife and I did a docuseries called Go All Creative that we she talked to super creatives all over the world, different industries, Grammy Award winning, Oscar nominated. And these are people who they just keep at their top of the game over decades, right? It's like, okay, what is it that you're doing to do that? And we were shocked about some of the rituals that they do to stay in super capacity of mind and creativity. For example, and one thing we found is how many of them spend hours and hours in a shower, because that's when they can do their deepest thinking. That's when they get their epiphanies. They even have a waterproof pen and paper to jot some notes down. And if they get stuck and they have this issue, they'll literally turn on the shower and stay in there for 3 hours. Like more than one across different sectors. And if you think in your life, when you had a really complex problem and an epiphany, the solution came in your head, what were you doing? Were you walking on the beach? Were you woke up from a nap? Were you in the shower? What were you doing? And very few of us would say, oh yeah, we were just hyper focused on just sitting at a desk. Epiphanies don't come that way. It could be that you're talking to somebody. It could be that you were walking around thinking about something else, and all of a sudden the solution came in your head. And we're finding out through brain imaging that is a physiological thing of what happens and what activates a default mode of the brain that activates when you're doing mindless things and not task-based things. And it's like a dimmer switch. It takes most people 3 hours to 3 days to make those switches between those modes. So if you want to amplify the deep thinking and empathy and storytelling and understanding and reflection of your past and extrapolation to the future. Those aren't task-based sides of the brain. It's default mode. And it takes a sacred space and buffered time of 3 hours, 3 days to amplify that. And so I've adjusted, and one of the things in working with teams is they said, man, I underestimate the capacity of my team by 5x. And all they did was they put all their default mode meetings where we're not going to plan tasks or actions or anything on Monday, but come Thursday, after we've kind of slept on it a few nights, we're going to come back and what are we going to do about it? We're going to focus on action-based. And just by separating time by at least a day, just amplify things for their ability to problem solve. And if you think about, and I bring this up because going back to education, think about how school is structured. It's the antithesis of that. You have these arbitrary periods of 1 hour, and you're going from class to class, switching modes. It's all task-based. What assignment do you have? Take notes, and no room for any deep thinking, which means that the default mode of the brain, the very things that we're talking about, empathy, around judgment, around reflecting on the past, looking to the future, trying to figure out what's happening in the future, understanding people, those aren't task-based things. And no wonder kids and students are underdeveloped in that area and struggling.
Yeah, thank you. I agree so much, and I use these lessons in my own practice. I'm a neurolinguistic programming guy, and when I need to memorize a TEDx talk, for instance, I do the memory palace in the house, in the actual house, which is not a palace, but you get the idea. And so I can, can tell you what part of any talk goes with, younger kids' bathroom, for instance. They're just, and so those I would hate to think that our future, best future, involves more looking at screens.
So then the driving question becomes, in a learning environment called a school facility, if we understand the science of this, how would we redesign it? Because the classroom, even a double wide classroom with team tables, can only go so far. Like, I know now that whenever I run into a deep problem that I'm ready to try to solve, I need to take a nap first. I'll wake up with a solution. I know that's my routine. If I have to go to an office every day, man, I have to have a place to take a nap if I want to be productive. I mean, or some people will need a shower, right? And if that works for super creatives, what do we do for kids to enable that, right? And the kinesthetic part of it. So those are big issues.
Andrew, did you want to make your comment?
Yeah, I'll just leave it there for people to read if they could. Ted was the one who mentioned neural pathways being created from a great teacher, and it impacts the rest of your life. And my question was, do we lose that to AI if we use AI to learn? Is it AI that benefits from that new neural pathway? Because we just don't absorb it at the same level you would from a teacher who you, I guess, respect and just connect with.
It's I wonder if AI can coach you on all the technical stuff and the steps you need to take for this and that and give you ideas. But at the end of the day, you have a coach, i.e. teacher, a mentor, who can take that all in and understand where you are at and add another layer of wisdom on top of that. Then there's value. I think you'll remember that, right? Versus someone sharing a bunch of information and 100 different pathways you could take. Just kind of exaggerate, right? But even 5 pathways you take. But like, me, and what I struggle with. What's kind of talk to me about this. And I think the thing that AI can over time, I think, learn the personalities of people. I will give it that. And I think it's going to get better and better at that, better than most people can, which means that humans have to up their game on their relationships and their deeper, nuanced understanding of people. Because AI probably knows more about everyone in this room than I know about you guys at this point. But just looking at, who knows what they're monitoring, right? Zoom's monitoring. But I think this is where we take it up to a different level. So that's where it's always a challenge of technology allows us to more information and potential to free up our time. How do we repurpose that time to do things that only humans can really do and do better of? And I think there's a huge upskilling of the human skills that has to be more intentionally focused on, not just in school, but within teams and organizations. And that's one of the things that, Ritz-Carlton learned very early on is how do you help people with a mindset of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen? What does that embody? And part of it is not just AI asking the question, but how do you share and connect with your fellow teammates? How do you say, this is how I exhibited, here's how I observed my team do it well, here's how I demonstrated it. Here's some opportunities that I could do more of, and here's what I observed my team we can do more to exemplify that value. That conversation and dialogue of people standing in a circle at the beginning of the day, connecting with each other, that's a physicality, that's a conversation that, AI can ask the question, you can see it on the screen, but at the end of the day, you see it on the screen, it prompts you, but having the actual person-to-person dialogue, and that's where the power comes from. And those are those protocols and rituals and things that are so human. And if you think about, when you talk about culture and you look at religious culture or ethnic culture, that certain rituals that have lasted for hundreds, if not thousands of years, it's rooted in sacred time and space and bringing people together to talk about, share common things so that there's that human connectivity. And those have outlasted dramatic changes in society and technology over those same thousands of years. So when you look at good culture or even bad culture that sustains, those are those common elements of that, creating that sacred time and space and use of certain protocols so that people connect in a particular high quality way that's consistent. Because people need that security. People need that security of those human connections. So I'm just I think good organizations will figure out how to use technology to just enable much more of the bandwidth of human capacity to spend time on that and not on the other things.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Ted.
I hope so. It'll be messy.
I'm keeping an eye on the time, but Jeffrey, maybe if you could contribute a comment or a question, then perhaps we'll bring our session to a close.
I do have a question, actually, that earlier in the discussion, I got the impression, rightly or wrongly, that there's great teaching material on the internet or provided by AI on everything, so that children can just find it as they need it. And of course, if that was true, it'd be absolutely wonderful. But my own experience is that anything I want to know, well, I can't find it on the internet well explained. And basically, I have to research stuff, put it all together, and find my own understanding. So, I suppose my question is there really a lot of great teaching material on the internet that people can use? Well, I suppose that is my question.
So, I think it depends on the subject area, right? So if you were to say we worldwide, there's a lot of pressure on saying kids don't have enough math skills. Well, AI and ChatGPT is probably going to be better at explaining most of those math problems than the teacher will, technically, right? So there's certain areas, but I think these bigger problems, depending on the subject matter, it's a bias of what AI has prioritized of the information it has access to. The other thing that's going to be interesting to see, and this is that industries and companies are withholding a lot of their proprietary and the most leading edge information in these fields. They're withholding it from the general public and making it only available, and the trend seems to be they're making it only available to their sector or only to themselves. And so this is where, if I'm a student, that I want to learn this area, I'm going to need to build a relationship with that company or with someone in that industry. So I'm allowed into that fold. Again, relationships first, then relevance, because it goes to that same framework. And I think for that's probably the first safety measure, so that for every industry has a bit of control what's going on, and it's not going to get contaminated by others that don't know that industry really well. Like if you have an architect sector and then people who know nothing about architecture are starting to contribute into that, then it gets just messy. That we see that in healthcare with all the independent health blogs with no scientific basis. It just gets messy. So I think industries will start to control that, but then it does boil down to, if there are these pods of knowledge that are now off limits to the general public, we need to teach people, our teams, our students, how to access them. And the answer usually is you got to build a relationship to start, that they trust you, you trust them, they're going to let you in the fold. Now you have access. It's back to that again.
Yeah, I certainly believe all that. But again, I question whether the material really is there on the internet. So, of course, there's any number of YouTube things which will explain stuff to you, and I'll either do it well or not so well. There's also the issue of being able to find it. I have in mind the children you were talking about. If I understood you correctly, you're creating a new educational structure, which sounds absolutely wonderful. And your experience of kids not wanting to leave at 7 o'clock at night, that 20, 30 years ago, we used to do stuff with kids in robotics. It was exactly the same, that the worst behaved kids were absolutely passionate and they started behaving fabulously. And so, of course, the motivation side, I absolutely agree with. And I can share your experience of conventional schooling, which is it was painful and not very productive. But I still have this. I mean, if it were the case that there's a lot of really great stuff, teaching stuff out there, I'd be delighted. And if we could harvest that and curate it and distribute it, that would be wonderful. But having thought about this for a long time, I don't find that. I find most of the stuff is just not good enough.
Yeah, I think a year ago it was, and then every model that I'm playing with, it's exponentially better. So where it's really has been really good, if you think about the training required for these models, it's the access to the right data is really important. So one of the first areas that it is really good at is legal, because it can read every court case. It can read, it's ingested every court case, any public, set of laws and regulations and regulatory letters, everything. And so that it tends to be really good at. I would say medical and science, reading every research paper, ingesting that, it's pretty good at that. Where we found that it's not so good at is like, for example, writing a screenplay. It's good at writing poems, not good at writing a screenplay, because there's missing there. It's good at evaluating it and saying story structure and what it has and what it doesn't have. It's not good at generating it. Could it get there in a few years? Well, if it has read every screenplay that has been the most successful in history across all countries, it could probably get there. So it's just hard, that accessibility to ingest that information. There's a certain sectors that are, and certain bodies of work that have been more accessible, and that's where we're seeing the most progress. And there's others that inherently is going to be very inaccessible, and that's where it may not be as good.
Yeah, I'm not so ambitious. I'd be pretty happy to have X101 done very well.
And I'll start to draw us to a close today, but first of all, thank Ted for the extended time. And I think you see that, I've had some great content being worked on with me. And then I go, hey, why don't we put that into a social media post? And my goodness, like just the quality just goes off a cliff. You just cannot get a good social media post out of ChatGPT. Hey guys, excited to share with you. It's like, and what does that say? It means that most social media posts are crap because that's what it's learned on.
Mhm.
Fact. So yeah, it's interesting. I do wonder how much is being inputted now, Jeffrey, because obviously it's scanned the web, but now we're getting teachers interacting with this, and I wonder how much it's learning, how much it cares about any particular sector. Sorry, I'm anthropomorphizing AI there, but the people behind it. So much more to talk about. Ted, you've raised lots of interesting questions, thoughts, ideas. Thank you for spending some extended time with us just to go around the room as well. That's really generous of you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I just dropped in my contact information in the chat, my email. So if anyone wants to reach me, and then Ted Fujimoto is my handle across most of the on X, on social media, Instagram, all that stuff.
I mean, that's very generous of you as well, Ted, to share those details. Hopefully we'll speak again. In the meantime, wish you every success with your endeavors. I'm glad the world's got people like you in it, Ted, for sure. That's no question. And it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone.
See you soon, folks. We'll
Have a
close down
wonderful
now.
day, evening.
Bye.